Hello? Can you hear me out there? All right. We'll get started in a minute or two. Give people a little bit of time to come in. Not a lot of people tonight. Normally there's more people waiting. Oh, right. Labor Day in the States. Forgot about that. Well, all the better, I guess, that we didn't do an episode of inappropriate characters. An update on that for those who are interested. Grim thinks he's got the technology sorted. I'm not that sure yet, but he thinks so, and he's the one that knows. But Avenger couldn't do it this weekend. Okay. So my pipe is going. My coffee's ready. I can see that. I think that's just the glare. Oh, now I've caused trouble. This is not working out. Oh, there we go. Okay. And look who's come. Guess who's here, everyone? Oh, look. It's Big Chungus. Okay, this don't look pretty, but that's how it is, I guess. The glare might also be because of the just the lighting. Maybe I've got too much, I don't know, front lighting or back lighting or something, but let's not worry about it. None of you are here to stare at a mostly immobile screen. You're here to listen to me talk, right? And speaking of which, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords. Tonight, we're having a live stream and going to talk about a number of subjects, but first and foremost, I wanted to talk about something that I'd seen posted on Twitter that had been posted from elsewhere. This is some SJWs that have made a declaration demanding that Wizards of the Coast eliminate stat bonuses for demi-humans, for elves and dwarves and halflings and gnomes and tieflings and whatever else from the D&D game, because the suggestion of stat bonuses by race is racist, according to them. So let's clarify. If you're giving your, I don't know, your dwarves a +2 to constitution and a -2 to dexterity, you're a racist. So this is really funny, right? And they're demanding it of Wizards of the Coast because we all know that, left coast, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco liberals are, of course, the most racist people in the world. It's obvious that the reason that those rules exist is purely due to, white nationalism. That's the only possible reason why Wizards of the Coast does anything, really. And I mean, they're owned by Hasbro, right? And clearly Hasbro must somehow be, involved with the descendants of the former Third Reich or something like that. The stupidity of these people is amazing. And it just seems really telling to me that the way that they persecute their own, I mean, that should be putting up big red warning lights for pretty much anyone who thinks that these guys are, that what the left is up to in general these days is a good idea. Because, I mean, if you're going after Wizards of the goddamn Coast as being racists, then that pretty much guarantees that you're going to end up seeing, if the left ever got what it really wanted, you would see gulags and killing fields, right? Where you would be killed for being extremely progressive, but not very extremely progressive. So not being very extremely progressive is a death sentence, right? That's going to happen eventually if they, it would happen if they could get all the power they could want in the world. Because at its heart, these people are tyrants, right? They're people that believe in this ideological purity that's unattainable. Sam Rice says, Pundit, don't you mean Grand Wizards of the Coast? That's a good one. I like that. All right. So I was thinking about this because this came out a couple of days ago, and I've been thinking about this since then. A lot of people have commented. And my first thought, of course, is the way in which clearly racial stat bonuses are not racist. The argument against them being racist. But then on the other hand, I also decided to think about a way in which it was racist and that it does very much make sense, So I'm going to give both arguments tonight. And I'm trying to figure out which one I want to start with. I mean, I guess I should start with the reason why I think it's not racist, because that's the more obvious one to all of you. And then we'll see from there. But before I begin, let me point out, if this is your first time watching me, welcome aboard. If it's not your first time, but you still haven't subscribed, then please subscribe to the channel and share this video, share any of my other videos anywhere you'd like to. It would be a really big help. I'm still trying to build up the numbers in this channel. We've got, we're doing really well. We're getting high results every time and a very high ratio every time, because you'll notice that sometimes you have people that, channels that supposedly have 200,000 subscribers, but then they end up getting like, 10,000 views, right? So what are the 200,000 subscribers doing there, right? Or sometimes there's, sites that have 20,000 subscribers, but they get less views than I do on their videos. And right now I'm still building up the subscribers. I got 13 something or other. 13, we're almost at 1350. Maybe by the end of tonight, 50, that would be nice. But my videos routinely get between 1,000 and 1,500 views. So I'm getting almost as many to more than the number of people that are actually subscribed to me. That's a very good ratio. So when I get more than 13, I'm kind of surprised why isn't the number of subscribers going up faster? But well, we all know that YouTube has all kinds of shenanigans, and we also know that they're not going to do a damn thing to promote this video or any of my other videos. So if you like this video, please share it. Share the news about this live stream right now while it's happening. Share the news later on when it's, already been filmed, and just spread the word. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you might not otherwise get some alerts about me doing videos like this. Besides that, if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon and a PayPal page, but rather than just throwing money at me directly, you could instead purchase my products, purchase my books like Lion and Dragon or Dark Albion, or you could purchase my RPG Pundit Presents PDF series, which is a series of short supplements for OSR fantasy D&D style play. A lot of them are system neutral. They vary from medieval authentic stuff to really serious gonzo, really crazy gonzo stuff. And we're up to number 90 of RPG Pundit Presents series. Each issue varies from about 99 cents. There's one that's pay what you want, but then other than that, it's like 99 cents to about at the most $4.99. So it's like you're dropping Patreon money on there, but you're getting something immediately back for it. And you now have a catalog of 90 issues to look through. And I'm sure you're going to find a lot of them that you like. The latest one that just came out is RPG Pundit Presents number 90, Medieval Authentic Secret Societies. And I'm very proud of this one. It's got a collection of unusual secret groups. There's 5 of them, I think. Ranging from to start with craft guilds and what the craft guilds were like, and then beyond that, there's a number of different groups that are all based on real things that happened, but I am taking some liberties with the creation of it. But they're all stuff that really could have been conspiracy secret societies or special secret groups that existed in the medieval period. And they're quite interesting. So be sure to check that out. But if that's not to your style, you could pick up, I don't know, Fuck Station Aleph, which was the issue that came out before, which is a crazy gonzo space opera style setting of a sky station that has become a kind of Las Vegas of the skies, and has all kinds of weird creatures and mysteries and 100 levels to it and all kinds of stuff like that. So check out my books, purchase the books. That supports me, keeps me doing stuff like this. Back to our main topic. Are racial stat bonus racists? I've seen that a lot of you have made a number of comments here. I don't know if I can really go through all of it, but let me see what we've got here. Dave Pettit says, I suppose having different character abilities is ableist too. Well, you laugh, but that will undoubtedly be coming. Eventually, the end result of this sort of RPG communism is that you're going to only be allowed to make characters in D&D that have all 9s. You have to have a slightly below average character in everything so as not to offend anyone. Same Riza says, high elves are the pinnacle of evolution. Dracopole says, races in fantasy are vastly different. Even giant spiders can talk. End of debate. Well, you think it would be, don't you? But here we are. Same Riza says, 5e proves that dwarves are the superior race. Tony J.R. Thomas says, the SJWs broke the word and concept of racism. You're right, Tony. And that's one of the worst things they did. Because it used to be a really powerful word, and a word that would really identify something. And that would be a really important way of noting some extremely bad behavior. But when it got turned into just anybody that the radical left doesn't like, that was destroyed and those lines were blurred. So now it can be very hard to actually call out genuine bad behavior in the place of stuff that just isn't what the extreme left demands. And that's one of the greatest problems that all of this extremism on the left has caused. You've basically ended up with a situation. Oh, damn it. Well, slight accident. I'm having a lot of trouble. I reworked a little bit of my table here. God damn it. All right, it's okay. It's okay. We got it under control. Even Big Chungus is unharmed. We're just gonna have to sort this. How am I gonna do this thing here? For the moment, try to hold this up there. Okay, there we go. There we go. All right, now let's get stuff back in line here. All right. Okay. So you can see this is like absolute amateur hour, for fuck's sake. What I really need to do is get some kind of a better stand where I can put my books on, you know. But let me think. Well, you know what? I'm just gonna leave this like that for now. It's fuck it. It's just too much. All right, carrying on. The show must go. That's right. This was an SJW plot. No, it's actually, I got a new computer and it's wider than it used to be. So that means that the table is further away from the shelf. And that means that I don't have enough room that I have too much space, too much of a gap there to rest what I'm using to rest my books on. And yeah, it's just really inconvenient. I need to get some kind of a book stand where I can put those books up and then film that, right? But it's just not working right now. I will figure it out, but I'm not going to figure it out right now, I guess. So let's just continue with the live stream. No, it wasn't my name. It wasn't a cat attack. It was just something slid. I don't know what happened. Yeah, I could have been a goblin. Geeky Bugle says, buy a webcam. Well, my phone has a good webcam, you know? And it's actually more convenient for me to use. I don't really want to be filming. Well, now that I got a new computer, I guess I could film from the computer. It used to be my computer was too much shit to even film with. But well, Mr. Max says, my cats. So there is that. All right. As usual, my live streams are a walking disaster area. So I'm going to get to the point. Let's get started with this. Stats for characters, you know, stats for elves and dwarves and whatnot is like, you know, you play a race in D&D that isn't human and they get a +1 to something and a -1 to something, or a +2 to something and a -2 to something. Like it might have, you know, +2 strength and -2 intelligence, or +2 constitution and -2 dexterity, or something like that. And there are some people, some SJWs, that are saying this is racist. So, argument first for why it is not racist, and afterwards I'll give you my argument for why it is racist. My argument for why it's not racist is very simple. The argument for why it's not racist is because in this game, there are a number of different races. Only one of those races actually exists in the real world. Do you know which one it is? It's human, right? Now, all those other races, the argument that the SJWs make, are meant to somehow represent, you know, um, other racial groups, I guess, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. It never made any sense. But I mean, like this is this idea that they've had in their heads that started when someone incorrectly thought that an orc was meant to be a black person or something like that, right? Which just shows you how racist the person that made that inference was, right? The, the classic that come out from mythology, like elves and dwarves, those races are meant to be, you could say, a kind of sub-archetype, a kind of archetype of the fairy folk of the other world, right? But the point is that they're symbols, is what they are, and they are meant to be very, how would you put it, monolithic, right? They aren't, the dwarves and elves in their original intent were not meant to be other people, they were meant to be these creatures of stardust, right? These creatures of this world that is this luminal world that is outside of the normal world of mortal man. And they, as such, they don't have souls in the medieval context, and as such, they are creatures that have much less depth than a human being, because they aren't complex the way humans are complex. They do one thing, right? Or, well, they might do one or two or three things, but they have one theme, right? They come out of one part of the map of archetypes, the map of symbols, you could say, the tree of life, or whatever you want to call it, so that they're symbolic of some other concept. Humans aren't that. Humans are their own thing. And you will notice that one of the great details of the D&D game, at least by default, is that D&D humans are all the same, in the sense that there are no racial modifiers. There's no legitimate D&D game I know of where black people have a different racial modifiers to their ability scores than white people or than Asian people, right? One of the lessons you get in D&D is every human starts out with the same 3d6 in every ability score, and so there's an instant level of equality there that is in fact an extremely anti-racist thing when you think about it, right? Like it's directly a statement about how we all start out with the same basic set of random chance, and then within the limits of our abilities that are randomly determined, not inherently better than one or the other, but that are obviously going to be in each individual, some people will be better than others. We all then have the same equal opportunity to be brutally murdered, right? Or to somehow make our way through all that, become powerful, and then end up retiring in a castle, right? So the idea that the stats for made-up creatures is more important than the fact that in D&D all humans are treated the same is really an example of just the blind agenda of this group of assholes that are always looking to condemn. Because really, of course, the people that make these statements, what they're really saying isn't, oh, D&D is racist. They're saying, I hate D&D, and I hate the people that play D&D, and I hate everything that D&D represents, and I hate the society that created D&D, and I hate the civilization that created that society, right? So these guys are not, they don't actually care, because they don't play D&D. They don't care what the stat bonuses are. What they care about is the destruction of Western civilization. And this is just one tiny little skirmish in the larger culture war that they're fighting. So that's the argument for why, obviously, racial stat bonus differences in demi-humans is not in any way racist. Because elves and dwarves aren't races. They don't actually exist on the material plane. Someone pointed out that people in Iceland would disagree with me about elves. Well, okay, let's accept in fact that in the level of the imaginaria, right, in the realm, the very real world of these underlying forces of reality, whatever you want to call those levels, the levels of the eight elements or the sphere of Yesod. Yeah, those are those things. Like everything we imagine is absolutely real, but it's not real on the level of the world of 10,000 things, on the level of the material world. Um, and there is no, and those aren't meant to be races. And one of the sad things about how people run D&D now is that elves and dwarves and gnomes and orcs and tieflings and all these other weirdo things are just people, and usually less interesting people, because it gives you an excuse to not have to think hard about what your character is like, because you don't need to have a personality if your character is blue, or if your character has horns, or if your character it has wings, or is pointy ears, right? So it's just shittier gameplay. So that's my argument so far. I see some people talking about how there were once differences, caps on strength scores for women. Yeah, well, that most people I know ended up ignoring that pretty damn quick, and it isn't something that stuck. I guess you could have said that was a kind of sexism, but really what it mostly was inaccurate emulation, not because men as a whole aren't stronger than women as a whole. That men on average, the average man stronger than the average woman, and the peak strength of men higher than the peak strength of women. Those are all true, but because the characters, it breaks the mythic element of it, that the characters that you are playing are meant to be mythic characters that are not bound by things like that. John Kirk says a true dragonborn would probably be isolationist by nature, like a dragon. Well, that's a great example of what I just mentioned, right? It's like you have dragonborn characters, and the way people are playing them, based on what we see on Twitter and on these shows and on all the other stuff. Dragonborns are a garbage race, anyways, right? But the way that they're playing them, part of what makes them a garbage race is that they're just people from Seattle in 2019 that happen to look like dragons, right? Or they're basically furries, except that instead of having a fursuit, they just are actually really not human. But they act like anybody else from Seattle in 2019. They do oh my god so random things, and they talk like somebody from 2019, and there's zero creativity in the fact that you're playing something that isn't human, right? And that's a huge problem, right? Because this is not how it's supposed to be. If you really are going to play another race that isn't human, then they should be something really, really goddamn alien, right? Because they're not human. And the more unlike human they are, the more alien they should be. And that's something that people today just don't bother, because to them it's just an opportunity to dress up, right? Because they've lost all understanding of how myth is supposed to work. Jacopole says, snowflakes want a unique race. They don't want to look like anybody else in the village. That's very right. And it kind of leads into my next argument. I will say now that racial stat bonuses are racist. And I'm going to explain why. Because the idea of having races other than human to play is inherently racist against humans. If there's one argument you can make, this is maybe not the greatest argument, but it is the only argument that is a legitimate argument for racial stat bonuses in mainstream D&D being racist. It's the national archetypal figures, myth, stuff out of myth and legend. They're no longer tied into that kind of Western canon of mythology. And instead, they're just weird-looking creatures that talk like humans and act like humans, but don't have to be humans. Basically, the reason you have these other races with these other powers is so that you don't have to be a human, right? And it's a fundamental racism against the human race. Because let's face it, these people despise humanity, right? This is why they want to play these, blue skin, air genassis or water whatever, or they want to be tieflings or dragonborn, diaper wearing dragonborns or gender indeterminate tieflings or whatever the hell they're doing. It's because they hate humankind, because they've been indoctrinated into hating humankind. They hate themselves, of course, for being human, and they want to pretend not to be. But they don't even really know how, and that's the tragedy of it, right? Because since they have no knowledge of actual the Western canon of myth, they don't even know what they're doing, right? They don't know how to present anything other. So it becomes completely superficial, like everything else in their lives, and it's just about how they look, right? So look at my, you have a tweet hashtag my D&D boy was drawing, Tumblr style of some blue guy dressed up like he's about to go to an LGBT rave or something like that, and not about to enter a dungeon. And look at how different he is and special, right? He's not human. I wish I wasn't human, right? This is what it is fundamentally. It's the same thing that has fueled all of the left for the, basically at least since the time of Foucault, if not since the time of, the Frankfurt School, is this absolute hatred of, obviously the first world Western countries, but beyond that, more, you could get more specific to something like America, or more general to white people. But they don't just hate white people. They hate black people and Latinos and Asians, because they hate the human race as a whole. They think humanity was largely a mistake. And you see the proof of this in things like the environmentalist movement, right? Where they have this autistic child going around the world, and who is being abused by her parents and her handlers in the radical environmentalist left, telling people they shouldn't have babies anymore, and that they shouldn't be allowed to eat meat, right? And that we have to basically shut down the West. We have to shut down our industrial world and go back to living in goddamn caves, because of Mother Earth, right? And it is essentially a hatred of everything that we've done and accomplished, right? And before you complain about me pointing out Greta's autism, well, look, there's two ways to look at this, right? Either she's an autonomous, intelligent adult, and you can therefore point out how unbelievably moronic her ideas are, how goddamn stupid everything she says and does is, and blame her for it. Or you can say that she's a poor little autistic girl, in which case she's being abused by everyone around her, who are just using her as a figurehead that can therefore not be questioned, right? So one way or the other, you can't have it both ways, right? Either she's an autonomous entity, in which case she has to defend the horrific ideas that she has, or she's a helpless, mentally ill, child who has been manipulated, and you can't argue otherwise. You don't get to play both sides of that argument. But anyway, the fact is that the modern interpretation of race in D&D, the way it's being used now, is very much for the purpose of downplaying human characters and humanity. So this is racism. Stat bonuses. Any bonus that a non-human gets is racism against humans. And you guys know my perspective on this. It's very, I've pointed it out in a previous video. The only good race in D&D, the race that your favorite race sucks unless it's human. Humans, because you don't have this crutch of having weirdo skin or fangs or wings or whatever, you're obliged to make the character have depth. And the cultures that you can create with human cultures are many and varied, whereas elves and dwarves are all fundamentally the same, right? And elves and dwarves are the best case scenario, right? Because they have still some slight rooting. They're still barely grasping onto the almost completely eroded topsoil of Western canon, and tapping into something that you can identify as being profound. But then when you get to stuff like gnomes and halflings, that's a lot weaker. Halflings, the only thing they have really is the pseudo myth of Lord of the Rings, right? And gnomes look nothing like any gnome that you'd see from mythology. And then when you get to stuff like tieflings and genasi and dragonborn, there's nothing there. They're completely empty creatures that have no fundamental value. So you're either just playing them as a freak human and using the freakiness as an excuse to not have to have depth, or you're not playing them with any kind of a personality or culture at all. So this is my argument, right? I'm saying if you're a DM, you should strongly consider only allowing humans, and especially if you're running something like a medieval authentic game, which is a game where you really should only have human beings as the playable character race, because all the other things should be profoundly alien and not really, they don't really think in the same way as humans do. They don't have those different levels. They are representative of archetypes. So looking at some comments here now. Tony J.R. Thomas says 5e is now Gamma World. Yeah, except it's Gamma World set in 2019 Seattle. If you run it in any other setting, then you're basically a white nationalist, and they don't realize that it was meant to be funny, right? They don't have any sense of humor, of course. Just ask Dave Chappelle. Apparently, I don't know. I just watched Timcast or something. Was it Timcast? I don't remember what I was watching, but apparently on Rotten Tomatoes, Dave Chappelle in the critics' reviews has 0%. It is officially, according to critics, the worst comedy special in human history, right? Even though it's very clearly fantastically good, right? So like we are living, this is the proof that, my friends, that we are living in bizarro world, because it's now absolutely a rule that if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, you look at the critic ratings, if the critics all agree that something is incredibly great and wonderful and you must watch it and it's the most wonderful movie of all times, you know it's going to be absolute garbage. And if the critics are all telling you mustn't ever watch this is a terrible movie, it's horrible, it's offensive, don't go, 0%, you know it's going to be amazing. That's where we're living at. And it's like we've gotten to this point. There's this point in the moment, I think maybe I've talked about this in another live stream, so if you've heard me rant about this before, then you should forgive me. But there's this point in the very late stage of the Soviet regime, of the the old communist bloc, where it became evident that all of the propaganda that was coming out was just blatantly not real, right? Like not real on the level of of like when Baghdad Bob was telling me, the Second Iraq War, when he was saying everything is fine, we're about to defeat the invaders, and it's right on the edge of, we're on the edge of victory, and you could like see the bombing in the background, right, as they were being, as the palace was being approached, right? And the Soviet Union, the same thing basically happened, that as the situation of personal unrest and this the economic collapse and all of the different problems that they were having became bigger, the propaganda just became more blatantly false, and everybody living there knew it was false. But because of the punishment that would act on you if you pointed this out, you weren't allowed to say it was false. So everybody had to pretend like they believed everything that was... Sorry, we're having some connection problems. But they had to pretend that everything was fine and great in the Soviet Union, in the late stage of the Soviet Union, when everybody knew it wasn't. And they called this phenomenon hyper-normalization. The West is living in hyper-normalization right now. The regime that controls the West, the establishment, has lost all legitimacy, all credibility. Nobody believes that the stuff they're saying is real anymore. So you watch CNN, you read Rotten Tomato critics, you look at the Huffington Post, right? You look at any of these sort of what Trump calls fake news, And you see them present these stories that we know are nonsense, that we know are blatant lies, but people, everyday people, people who aren't part of the red-pilled underground here, right? They have to pretend that they believe it, but nobody believes it. Everybody knows, that a fat woman comedian who talks about farts is not the greatest comedian in the world, and that Dave Chappelle is not a horrible, washed-up guy with no sense of humor, right? But they have to pretend like that is, because if they don't, their careers will be destroyed, their lives will be destroyed, they'll be doxxed, they'll be harassed, they'll be thrown out of social media, they won't be able to work, right? Because they'll be called white nationalists and things like that, right? So this is the hyper-normalization state, and it's what happens immediately before a regime completely collapses. And I think that we're seeing the collapse of the regime of the establishment. The Jeffrey Epstein suicide, Max Bovin just points out, like, that is the official narrative. Nobody believes that happened, right? Nobody. There isn't anybody, not on the left, not on the right, not anywhere. Everyone knows Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, but you have the official media continuing to point out, but he died and it was just bad luck. The cameras, neither of the two cameras were working, but that's tough, right? He totally committed suicide. That's our official report. And you have CNN saying, well, it was suicide. Nothing else we can do about it, right? And nobody's going to do anything about it because there's no reason to do something about it because everybody knows what's really happening. It's like the establishment has stopped pretending that they're not lying to us, and we've stopped pretending to believe them. Like there's nothing away from the main subject. Those are my two arguments about racial, because humans, the only actual real race, all have the same bonuses or lack thereof. They all roll the same way for their ability scores. Your personal race as a human does not affect how you roll your ability scores. And at the same time, racial stat bonuses are racist because they're discriminated against humans. I know that in some games, humans get certain bonuses that you could argue make up for the fact that they don't have the special powers and abilities of demi-humans. But beyond that, the official policy, you could say, the push in the style, in the culture of D&D, especially 5th edition D&D, is to make it more about, what's this? Some big chungus. Anyways, it's about making it more about playing these weirdo races because you're being indoctrinated. The kids today are being indoctrinated to hate being human. There's so much so that they're being told, and a ridiculously dangerous number of young people believe it, that they just shouldn't have children because it's so awful. Humans have been so awful for the environment. Let me make something really clear here. If the human race depends on the world, well, that's great. But if the human race is required to go back into being a cave-dwelling animal for the Earth to survive, then the Earth doesn't deserve to survive. The human race comes first. The human race is the most important thing in this world because we're the only race, we're the only species that is able to achieve a consciousness outside of the world. We're the only species that is able to be enlightened, however you want to define that, right? The only one we know. There might be other ones out in the stars, but in this world, we're it. So if we can't figure out and expand beyond our environment and prosper, wouldn't deserve to exist as a species. But if the question is between harming other species, we have but we can't let the environment take priority over humanity. And this idea that certain, that the Malthusians have had for the last 300 years, as now represented by the likes of Greta and her handlers, is that the world, what it really needs is to kill about 6 billion humans or more, and to then undo all of the elements of the Industrial Revolution, and for us to go back to living like animals. And so then, that would be unworthy. And that's, I'm talking now from this kind of metaphysical perspective of humanity being the evolved species that is able to transcend in a way that other species can't. But there's also a very logical point to be had that if human beings fail at this, then sooner or later all life on Earth is going to die anyways, because we're the only species that, if we get smart enough, could prevent, say, the world-shattering accident that is inevitably statistically going to happen to the Earth. A meteor strike, supernova, cosmic rays, whatever, that will end up extinguishing life anyways. So we're the only chance humanity has, and we should be teaching our kids that humanity comes first. Humanity comes above the planet. And instead, we're teaching them that they should intentionally choose to sterilize themselves so that we don't hurt, we don't hurt the trees and the birds and Mother Gaia. The left is a death cult. Anyway. Korg says, is there schism in D&D with Colville's latest video addressing role-playing? I'm not sure what that video is. You're going to have to enlighten me on that, because I am not familiar with it. Mariah Sinclair said, CNN apologized to Mao and Stalin for comparing them with Trump. They're insane. I don't know if that actually happened, but if it did, it sounds like it could have perfectly happened, of course, because to them, Trump represents the greatest of all possible evils, because he represents the collapse of the establishment regime. And, it's not just going to be him. It can't just be him. And if it is just him, it won't work. But he's only one part of a whole process that is happening now in the hyper-normalization end stage of the Western leftist globalist, not really leftist, even. It is this globalist, with strong leftist values, of course, but they are fundamentally about this kind of elite control, right? They use things like socialism to push for their own control, and they're collapsing now, and they know it, and that's why they would certainly that they would say he's worse than that other guy that starts with H. My name is Dave Chappelle is a white nationalist. Yeah, well, they certainly think so. How dare. Let's see what else we've got here. What other people have said. Max Boyven says, let's not kid ourselves. Most humans don't care at all about the environment. I think you're wrong, Max. I think that most humans care quite a lot about the environment. They care about the real things that are real and obvious environmental problems. And here we have another situation, because just like you saw in the situation with racism, with the use of that word, how the left started using that word to refer to anybody they don't like, racist, right? You're a racist if we don't like you, first of all. And second, if the reason we don't like you is because you disagree with some of our ideological agenda, the only possible answer to that is you're a racist, right? So that diluted the word racism, and it occupied the word racism and distorted it, weaponized it into something for their agenda. The same thing has happened with environmentalism, because I think the average person cares a lot about, for example, not dumping chemicals into rivers, about if there's an ocean, if there's a mountain of plastic floating in the ocean, that is an obvious problem, right? Any of these kind of things that involve air pollution, ground pollution, or sea pollution are real things, and they're real things that people care about. People want their world to be nice. Most people are very good, at heart, they would be good stewards of the world, right? They would want to help preserve our world. But the problem is that instead what you've had is the left take over this environmentalist agenda and turn it into this idea with stuff that we know is a lie, right? The global warming, climate change, carbon emissions, and that if we don't do something in 10 years, the world's going to end. I don't want to say exactly what my age is, but I have been told pretty much my entire adult life that the world is about to end in 10 years due to some kind of climate disaster. First, it was like global warming. Before that, it was even global cooling, right? But But then it was global warming and then climate change, however you want to talk about it, right? And there's been predictions, in 2000, that 2000 was 20 years ago. In 2000, they were predicting that by 2008, there would, the children in the UK would never see summer. And by 2009, the polar bears would all be extinct because the ice caps would have melted, right? And yet, we just keep letting these people repeat that same lie. The date is always 10 to 20 years from now, right? It's always that. And and they possess the crisis. They've added stuff that we know are lies to things we know are truth, right? Throwing garbage into forests is a really bad idea, right? Dumping mercury into water is bad. We know that, and that's truth. But then they go around saying, well, and then also it's really bad to have Western capitalism because that destroys the environment. And so what you have to do if you don't want the world to end in 10 years is give us absolute control over your lives. Let us sterilize 90% of the population, force you to eat maggots instead of meat, water rationing, you don't get to own a car, you don't get to fly, and we're going to call it the Green New Deal, right? And so people then say, well, screw it. I'm not an environmentalist anymore. Screw it. I mean, like drill, baby, drill, and burn, baby, burn, right? So the problem isn't that most people are not interested in the environment. It's that most people are naturally reacting with disgust at the idea that the only way they can be in favor of the environment is if they want full communism and the death of 5/6 of the human population, right? Which is what the fundamental end game of the environmentalist movement is. So, of course, they're not going to be in favor of that, and so they've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. What we really need in this, in this society, is an environmentalist right. A strong environmentalist movement within the right wing that believes in capitalism, believes in solutions being brought in by industry and commerce, and that is strongly wants to clean up the streets and the forest and the and the desert and the oceans, of real problems that we can really see and that we can really fix with the right plan, right? That you can make a concrete plan to improving. That would be fantastic. Buried Axe Play says, is half the people here on 4chan / Paul? Probably they are. My name says, I've got a pile of kids all homeschooled. Well, if you're anywhere in the modern Western world and you're letting your kids go to a public school, you're probably doing them unspeakable harm at this point. So good on you for homeschooling. We have the algorithm says we make gnomes a kind of dwarf that lives in the forest instead of underground. Yeah, that's really pathetic too, because gnomes are they have their own deal that's separate from that, and I don't know how they ended up so weird. Korg says they I assume the environmentalists hate the line of Adam and its need for redemption. Well, yeah, that's one way to put it. Tony says, tell China to stop polluting. Well, yeah, it's always the problem is that environmentalism, modern extreme environmentalism, is also anti-Westernism, right? So it shows what they really care about. They don't really care about, they know that the whole climate change things, the idea that there's going to be a rising sea level is nonsense. I mean, if they really believed that, the Obamas wouldn't have just spent $15 million to get a seaside mansion, on Martha's Vineyard, that all their predictions say will be completely underwater in less than 10 years. So they know that that's a lie, right? And what they really care about is destroying the West. Geeky Bugle points out environmentalists are against nuclear energy, which is really, I mean, a lot of alternative energy is nice, but nuclear energy is the only real solution if you want to stop burning fossil fuels. It's the only one we have right now. It's the only one we're likely to have in time to really make an important difference in terms of the world's supply of fossil fuels. So we're getting ever better at burning fossil fuels. So there is that too. But really, the nuclear energy should be seen, with caution and care as one of the greatest clean energies you could have. Um, Kid Cavalier says, "Pull is for sissies. I'm on the QE farms." For the record, I don't regularly go to any of those places, um, but I'm sure they're cool. I go to the RPG site. Go to therpgsite.com. Uh, Chris Donovan says, "Did you discuss how some races can interbreed and some can't?" Yeah, well, that is kind of weird, right? You'd think that all races could interbreed. I mean, in my Gonzo campaign, there are lots of races, and pretty much anything can interbreed, right? The characters figured this out one time when they were in the Tangled Woods and they saw an owl and a bear, a giant owl and a bear, in the process of making an owl bear. So there you are. Um, anyway, so this was the bulk of my argument. Besides that, I wanted to, on a totally different topic, I'm working on right now, as an RPG Pundit Presents product, a mini game, an OSR mini game that is a space opera type game where the rules are going to be fairly similar to the Lion and Dragon rules, which have some interesting variations on standard OSR play. So I've been working this out. There's, they're speaking of places where having other races can make some sense. Space opera is one of them, not necessarily hard sci-fi, because in hard sci-fi, really alien races should be really alien, right? And it would be quite difficult to effectively roleplay them. But in space opera, you basically can have, we're talking about Star Wars or Star Trek type stuff. Star Trek isn't exactly space opera, but the way they treat races is. So you can't do that there. And they're, the races are going to be, they're still going to be stereotypical, right? And this is actually something I kind of made into the product itself, where since the game isn't going to have any kind of setting, at least not in the original, in the basic mini game itself. Maybe I'll end up making a setting that'll come out as a later RPG Pundit Presents product. But the game is going to be meant to be something that you can use in whatever setting you want. Whether you want to do it like in Star Wars or something like that, or to make your own setting. So instead of creating races and naming them stuff, right, like Klingons or Vulcans or Wookiees or something like that, what I did is I presented when in the races section a bunch of archetypes of the type of races that they could be, right? So you have the warrior race, the giant race, the schemer race, the underwater race, the technical race, the intellectual race, the contemplative race, and the hunters. And so each one will have their own modifiers, and they'll also have certain special abilities and one or two species skills. And I think that's, for science fiction, that's a good way to do it. And the fact is that's in sci-fi it becomes quite transparent, because you're not really dealing with some kind of mythical archetype. I mean, it's a very, very distant cousin of a mythical archetype. But now here you've got races as being allegorical stereotypes, right? Vulcans are logical, right? Klingons are warriors, right? Wookiees represent kind of this primitive giant shaggy man thing that actually is very archetypal, right? The hairy man is something that goes back all throughout human mythology. But so you in the game, you'll roll your ability scores. you'll pick or roll depending on what the DM wants for a random race. Of course, humans are more, somewhat more likely to be a race than the other ones. And then each race will have modifiers or bonuses or what have you to bonuses and penalties to their ability scores, and they'll have possibly some racial skills or some racial special abilities. And then after that, you roll in a background table, similar to the background table in Lion and Dragon. But instead of being social class, it'll really have more to do with kind of what your home world was or what your home environment, your original. There's like that I've, and it goes from stuff like a spacer, someone who grew up in space, con artist, you come from a criminal family, cultist, technician, pilot. It was basically where you grew up or what your first job was, right? Primitive, aristocrat, all that sort of thing. And each one of those will have a number of skills. Skills will have bonuses. Skills are rolled just like in Lion and Dragon. You roll a d20, your ability score modifier, skill bonus, and any miscellaneous bonus against the difficulty. And then you've got the classes, and the classes, I'm trying to remember what I made for them here, but there's going to be regular classes, and then I've got 3 different types of psychic classes, which could also be kind of mystics if you preferred, right? I'm calling them psychic classes mostly because that's more likely to be what you'll use. But I mean, if you're talking about, if they're going to be like Jedi, they could be that too, right? So yeah, I've just opened up my current draft of this. So you got backgrounds. Backgrounds are stuff like aristocrat, commoner, criminal, cultist, tech. From a family of tech workers. Mercenaries are rebels, merchants, stuff like that. And then the classes, each class will have a requisite ability score, base hit points. Hit points here are going to work similar to in Lion and Dragon in that you have a set number that you roll at first level, and then after that, at base, you're only going to get 1 or 2 hit points per level. Your constitution acts as your backup hit points. So when you get to 0 hit points, you take damage to constitution. If your constitution gets to 0, you're dead, right? A critical hit will do damage direct to con. Your characters will have, each class will have a specific special ability, and then you'll choose one of 2 to 4 specializations, which will be kind of specific careers within that class that'll give you a few more skills and another small special ability. And then that's basically your character. So the classes are stuff like brute, explorer, rogue, technician, and warrior. And so, for example, for a warrior, you could be a gang enforcer, a hitman, an officer, or a stormtrooper, right? As a technician, you could be an investigator, a lore master, or a scientist. A rogue could be bounty hunter or scum. And then you have the psychic adept, psychic mystic, and psychic warrior, which are 3 different slight varieties of psychic / magic character. And with each of the classes, when you go up in level, you'll have an advancement table, just like in Lion and Dragon, where you'll roll a die twice on the table to get 2 different advancements each time you level up. Or you can, instead of rolling, just pick one of the options. And so for each class or each group of classes, like for example, for the brute, explorer, and warrior, all roll on the same table. The rogue and technician roll on the same table. And then there's one table for psychic adepts and mystics and one table for psychic warriors. Psychic powers work in a way somewhat similar to in Lion and Dragon, where you have a power check that you have to make. That's a d20 plus your modifier plus your level, plus miscellaneous bonuses, versus a difficulty number for that power. If you succeed, the power works, subjected to saving throws and things like that. And if you fail, then you're unable to effectively use that power again until you've rested.
and the psychic powers are all basically. I was toying with making like groups of powers, something like that, but yeah, I said no, screw it. I'm just gonna have. There's gonna be like 20 psychic. They're each their own thing, and they're pretty typical stuff, right? So you have um, stuff like calming, divination, empathy, kinetic strike, manipulate energy, psychic bolts, psychic healing, illusions, psychic shielding, psychic stealth, scrying, sixth sense, telekinesis, etc. Um, and then on top of that, you also have like some of the psychic classes can have access to like psychic weaponry in the style of the lightsaber or what have you, psychic laser swords that do base damage plus their current level and can ignore certain types of armor and stuff like that. So this is the basic thing. It's a bit of, I'm giving you a bit of a preview. It's a product that's going to come out as a future RPG Pundit Presents product. I don't know when. Maybe it'll come out as number 100. Who knows? We're on number 90 right now. So I wanted to see what you guys thought about that, whether you find that interesting. If you're going to pick it up, that would be great. Mostly I'm doing it because I'm about to run a space opera campaign and I wanted to use, I was looking at possible systems. I was, I wanted to go with something OSR. I considered very strongly to go with like Stars Without Number. It's a great game, but it didn't quite fit what I wanted. So instead, I said, screw it, I'm just going to make my own, right? And of course, I drew inspiration from all the current OSR sci-fi games like Star Without Number, Machinations of the Space Princess, and stuff like that. But it's not going to be like any of those. It's going to be its own thing. Maybe it'll be a little bit more fast and loose. I expect it'll be a bit grittier in terms of combat. Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see if there are any comments to be had here, especially since I wasn't looking at the chat box just now. Oh well, Geeky Bugle says, "What price? I already want to buy it. I don't know what price it'll be. That's up to my publisher. But the first part of that, which will be basically what I described, like character creation and all the details of like characters, skills, races, psychic powers, that'll all be in the first product. But it won't have stuff like, it won't have equipment, it won't have spaceships, it won't have any kind of setting stuff. So it'll be a set of character creation rules that'll be pretty self-explanatory within the OSR context that you can then put into whatever you want. And as an RPG Pundit Presents product, it's not going to be super big either. It's going to be a typical size for that line. So it'll be somewhere in between 99 cents and $4.99. I'm expecting anyway. But yeah, I leave the pricing to my publisher. My name says, when is this coming out? I don't know yet. It hasn't even been submitted to the publisher yet, so it's going to be a while. Like I said, we're on RPG Pundit Presents number 90 right now, and this might not come out until, I don't know, around number 100 maybe. So it might still be a couple of months, but we'll see. And in the meantime, if you want to support me and you want to get some really good content, including pseudo sci-fi and gonzo sci-fi and weird sci-fi sort of stuff, check out my current issues of RPG Pundit Presents. I just came out last week with, I think it's number 89, was Fuck Station Aleph, which is my own, like, I kind of, people pointed out the similarity to Adventures of Tannis' Alpha Blue. Well, yeah, this was me saying this is how I would have done it, right? And so it's much less raunchy, and it's more like the Las Vegas of the skies. And it has a lot more like interesting kind of adventure hooks in that aren't in some way related to pornography, or something like that, but are actually about having adventures in this kind of super Las Vegas in space. Lots of weird races and stuff. You could check out Floating Islands of the Last Sun if you want a more fantasy-ish sort of take on this sort of thing. Skyships Happen, which is probably going to be the basis. The mechanics there, anyways, are going to be the basis probably of any starship system I would use. That's, I think, number 55, Skyships Happen. And RPG Pundit presents number, I forget if it's 3 or 4 high-tech weapons. The weapons are already there. The Great Floating City of Lowell is a domed city in space, basically. It's in the upper band of the World of the Last Sun. That is like a mix of fantasy and sci-fi, and has high-tech stuff in it too. And it's got all these different ideological factions fighting in a civil war for control of this domed city. Really cool stuff. So if you like that sort of thing, you should check out the whole list and see what you're gonna. I hope that you'll find something that you'll like and pick it up. My name says I kind of liked Shadowrun back in the day. Well, I never liked any of the rules for Shadowrun. I did kind of like the setting for Shadowrun. I thought it was pretty well done. Unfortunately, I never found the rules that were any good. Max Boyman says you should talk about one day about the advantages, disadvantages of working with a publisher. Yeah, that would be a good topic to talk about. Maybe I'll save that for another time. I can say this: I've had excellent relationships with every one of my publishers, and I'm still on very good terms with every one of them. So even though you would think that a guy like me would probably be a nightmare to work with, none of my publishers seems to have thought so. Right? I'm very meticulous. I'm very dedicated to my work. I produce everything on time. Sometimes not all my publishers have released things on time, but I've always gotten them in on time. And so I'm actually a very kind of disciplined guy by the standards of most RPG writers. And you can kind of tell that when you've got like some guys who haven't been able to fulfill a Kickstarter in 7 or 8 years, whereas I'm making one product a week and have done so for the last 90 or so weeks. So that tells you about my level of discipline. So for a publisher, publishers never complain about me. But I'll talk about what it's like to work with a publisher versus self-publishing in another video. It's a really good idea for a topic. John Kirk says, since you're thinking about a space RPG, what do you think about Spelljammer? I never much cared for Spelljammer. I did like the Princess Arc stuff from Mystara. I thought that was really cool. In my own, John, you should check out RPG Pundit presents number 53, Floating Islands of the Last Sun, which is kind of my take on this kind of aerial space type setting, but in a fantasy context, in a D&D kind of context. Number 53 is Floating Islands of the Last Sun, which has rules on generating your own floating islands. It talks about the different major power groups in the Floating Islands of the Last Sun, and races and things like that, and encounters. And then number 55 is called Skyships Happen, and it has rules for floating ships, for maneuvering and combat with those ships. It has a whole bunch of examples from some of these different groups and races in that setting. The algorithm says 97% of climate scientists agree that if we don't do something right now, their careers are over. I like that. Very good. I hope that would be true, but unfortunately, they've been managing to predict that the end of the world would be coming in 10 years for 50 years now, right? Like this prediction happened on the first Earth Day. That was in 1969, right? And here we are, 50 years later, 5 apocalypses later, according to them, and nothing has happened, right? And they keep saying it. Oh, in 10 years, if we don't do full communism right now, in 10 years, it's the end of the world. You know, how many more times are they going to say this that people are going to put up with it? It's just unbelievable. Buried Axeblade says, so you asked if I was serious when I put a reply in your video about that the tarot should not be used in D&D. Yes, I was serious. Okay, well, what I'll say to you, Buried Axeblade, I do have an RPG Pundit Presents source book. It's called The Arcana, and it's about incorporating the tarot as a magical tool, as a system of magic and training and things like that in your medieval authentic setting, right? So like, you know, in Lion and Dragon, it's right around the period that the tarot was first invented. And so I want to have some rules for how, if your characters, you know, if your magister got a hold of a tarot deck, what could he do with it? What would be interesting about it? And it's not talking really a lot about using the tarot for fortune telling, but as a set of images that contain these hermetic symbols and that by exploring it, the magister or the magician could learn certain powers and secrets and learn new spell techniques and things like that. Right now, I will point out, for the sake of people like Buried Axeblade, that this sourcebook doesn't actually require that you, the person, you, the player, use a deck of tarot cards. There's no requirement that you do that, right? Like it isn't like how to run, it's not like some of these RPGs that someone might make where instead of rolling dice, you're using tarot cards, or you're using tarot cards to do something in the game, and you have to actually own a tarot deck. Technically, you could totally look at the Arcana as a source book, use it in the game. In the game, your characters are using the tarot cards, but outside of the game, you and your players don't have to have a tarot deck anywhere near you, if that makes you feel more secure. I'm someone who made a living off of tarot for a while there when I was in college. It basically helped pay my way through college. It was one of the first kind of occult things I got profoundly involved in, and I think it gets quite a bad rap. Max Boyvan says, do you read a lot of non-OSR systems to see what other people do? Well, I mean, I've been gaming for decades and decades, and I've played a ton of non-OSR systems. And I do still play non-OSR systems, right? I mean, right now I'm running a Lords of Olympus campaign. That happens to be one of my games, and it was a game that was inspired by Amber Diceless, though. I am finishing an Aces and Eights campaign, which was a really, really good campaign where I did it set it in purely the historical Wild West. And I do still, of course, I do look at other non-OSR games. I mean, I've reviewed a ton of Venger Satanis's games. They're not OSR for the most part. So, but I mean, I do look at them. And there's of course a lot that I don't have time to look at anymore these days. Used to be I'd like try to really look into like whatever the Forge was making, so I could accurately cut it to pieces as the garbage it was. But since the Forge doesn't really exist anymore, since story gaming has just gone into the toilet, there's not really much cause for that. And it seems to me like these days, apart from legacy games, like, the new edition of Pendragon, the new edition of Call of Cthulhu, for the most part, the stuff that's really happening right now is 5th edition and the OSR, right? I mean, yeah, and also Pathfinder, but it seems like there isn't that many new games that aren't OSR that are really vitally important to look at anymore. Bluebane says, what do you think are the most special snowflake races? Well, I think probably Dragonborns and what the heck were they called? The golem things from Eberron. Well, you know which ones I mean. Anyways, I think those are quite bad. People playing stuff like Genasi or like semi-elementals or something like that. And of course, tieflings have just become ridiculous, just utterly ridiculous. Geeky Bugle says, what about White Star? I never actually got a review copy of White Star, so I haven't had a good chance to look at it. If you know, if it was that Pete Spawn or James Spawn? I always get them confused. Well, anyways, if you know Mr. Spawn, tell him I'm still waiting for that review copy. Max Boyvan says, climate scientists are no more credible than rapture guys. Well, yeah, both of them have now been making predictions for a very long time, and both of them have never been right about those predictions. So yes, I mean, what difference is there between the guy who said by the year 2005, Jesus will have come back and the world will be in the beginning of the end times, and the guy who said by 2005, Australia will have to be completely abandoned as unlivable because no city will be able to get water there, it's the same. They're both in a religion, one of them is in a kind of twisted Christian sect, and the other one is in a death cult to a dark mother goddess, right? So they're both the same. John Kirk says, what do you think of Starfinder if you have read it? I haven't read Starfinder. I've read a bit about it. I don't pay too much attention to stuff that Paizo or other failing companies are getting involved in because, what's the point? We know that they're not going to be around very much longer. Judd Goswick says, I like White Star very much. A well-done OSR treatment of sci-fi tropes. Well, I'll tell you this. I've never heard anything but good remarks about White Star. So, there you are. I can't give you a really informed opinion about it, but there's Judd Goswick's. So this was basically what I wanted to talk about today. We're getting close to the 1.5 hour mark here. I'll point out again for all of you who are currently watching, if you weren't watching at the beginning, please subscribe to this channel and please share this video or any of the other videos on this channel anywhere you can, because I'm definitely not going to be helped out in this by YouTube. YouTube is not going to be promoting me or my stuff. We all know that, and we all know why. So it's up to you guys to help me promote it, and sharing it and liking it and commenting are all apparently very good ways to help, and they help build things up. So by all means, please do that. And, be sure to subscribe and to hit the notification button so you don't miss future live streams or other videos. If you want to support me, back me up on, you can back me up on Patreon or on PayPal, but that's not what I'd recommend. I'd recommend instead, if you want to support me, pick up my products, get stuff like Lion and Dragon here, or Dark Albion, or Lords of Olympus, which I've mentioned, Cults of Chaos, which you were seeing at the beginning of the video before something caused all of my stuff to collapse. And, look into all of those. But, none of them are very expensive, right? Even like the hardcover of Dark Albion, I think, costs barely $30, right? When most hardcovers with that much art and stuff in them would be like $50, right? So be sure to check those out. But if you're a little lower on cash, or either way, you should really check out the 90 issues of RPG Pundit Presents. They cost no more than $5. Some of them cost as little as $1, and you get something back from that, something you can use in your game. With 90 issues, you're going to find something interesting that you'll be able to incorporate into your OSR or fantasy or D&D gaming of whatever kind. There's adventures, there's supplements, there's monster manuals, there's items, there's new magic, there's high-tech stuff, there's a robot generator, there's all kinds of things, a list of cursed items, really minor magical items, entire city source books for medieval authentic cities. You're going to find good material there, and it's cheap, but also you're giving me a tip, you're sending me some cash, and you're encouraging me to keep making more stuff. So that's the way to do it. Be sure you check it out at least and find something that you would like. Thanks to everyone for tuning in here. I'm hoping that sometime soon, like maybe in 2 weeks' time, we'll end up having an issue of inappropriate characters again. But for now, I guess I'm glad that you guys all came over to see my live stream. I apologize for the various technical issues and my own incompetence. I'm definitely not Grim Jim when it comes to being able to make video work really well. All right, so I guess that's it for today. And keep checking, keep writing, and share the video. Currently smoking a Lorenzetti poker plus what was this, Blue Boar.